One of the simplest and most beautiful goals in life is just to remain a good human being, get married, raise children, and find peace in the everyday joys of life. But when the fairy tale involves two of the most famous music icons of a generation, Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown, those simple dreams can become elusive. On paper, they seemed like a match made in heaven. Young, attractive, wildly successful recording artists. The world watched with hopeful eyes. But what the world witnessed instead was a slow, tragic unraveling, a love story that soured before our eyes. Petty jealousies, unresolved resentments, and the devastating collision between fantasy and reality tore them apart. And in the end, the one who paid the highest price wasn't Whitney or Bobby. It was their only daughter, Bobbi Kristina. This is the story of Whitney and Bobby, how it all began, why it all fell apart, and the tragic legacy they left behind. Whitney Elizabeth Houston was born on August 9, 1963, in Newark, New Jersey. Thanks to her father, John R. Houston, who worked in the mayor's office as head of planning, the family enjoyed a stable middle-class life. Whitney attended private Catholic school and was surrounded by music from birth. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a celebrated vocalist with the Sweet Inspirations, a group that backed music legends like Elvis Presley and Aretha Franklin. It was Cissy's rendition of Ain't No Way that showcased the same soaring high notes Whitney would one day become famous for. At the age of 11, Whitney performed her first solo, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, a hymn that reflected the spiritual grounding that would bookend her life. Her final public performance would also be a gospel song, Jesus Loves Me. Bobby Brown was born Robert Beresford Brown on February 5, 1969, in Boston, Massachusetts. The seventh of 8 children, he grew up in far more modest conditions. Like Whitney, Bobby honed his voice in church choirs, eventually forming a group with friends that would become New Edition. The boys were driven and unusually disciplined for their age, and after several talent show wins, they were discovered by producer Maurice Starr. Their debut album, Candy Girl, released in 1983, was a huge hit and shot them to teen stardom, especially the title track, which echoed the style of the Jackson 5. That same year, a young Whitney Houston was discovered by legendary music executive Clive Davis. Struck by her raw vocal talent, Davis signed her immediately to Arista Records. Though some accused her of having industry connections through her family, Whitney quickly proved that her talent was her own. Her debut album, Whitney Houston, was a triumph, thanks to hits like Saving All My Love for You and How Will I Know. She became the first African-American woman to gain massive exposure on MTV, breaking racial barriers in a still segregated music world. Her second album, Whitney, released in 1987, debuted at #1 on the Billboard chart, a first for a female artist. With hits like I Wanna Dance with Somebody, she became a symbol of youthful joy, optimism, and vocal perfection. 7 consecutive #1 singles cemented her place in history, surpassing even the Beatles and the Bee Gees. While Whitney soared, Bobby Brown's journey was more turbulent. In 1986, he left New Edition, disillusioned with how little money he had earned. He described receiving just $500 and a VCR after years of touring. In 1988, he released Don't Be Cruel, a groundbreaking R&B album produced by industry giants like Teddy Riley, L.A. Reid, and Babyface. It was a bold reinvention that sold over 7 million copies and included the explosive hit My Prerogative. Brown was no longer a boy band star, he was an R&B icon with swagger, energy, and edge. It was at the height of their fame that Whitney and Bobby crossed paths. To the public, it seemed like the pop princess had fallen for the bad boy of R&B. Their personalities were vastly different. Whitney, graceful and polished. Bobby, raw and unpredictable. They married in 1992, and from the very start, the union was controversial. Some believed Bobby resented Whitney's more polished. It was at the height of their fame that Whitney and Bobby crossed paths. To the public, it seemed like the pop princess had fallen for the bad boy of R&B. Their personalities were vastly different. Whitney, graceful and polished. Bobby, raw and unpredictable. They married in 1992, and from the very start, the union was controversial. Some believed Bobby resented Whitney's more polished image and greater commercial success. Others speculated that Whitney was drawn to the chaos Bobby represented, a world far removed from her carefully crafted persona. Soon, the glamour of their marriage gave way to headlines that were much darker. Arguments, arrests, rumors of violence, and, most damaging of all, drugs. Whitney's drug use, once whispered about, became public knowledge. The pressure of maintaining a perfect public image while living in a crumbling private world began to take its toll. Bobby's behavior grew more erratic. Whitney's once flawless voice began to falter. Interviews showed a different side of the couple, paranoid, agitated, and defensive. Despite repeated attempts at rehabilitation, both Whitney and Bobby seemed caught in a spiral of codependency and addiction. Their daughter, Bobbi Kristina Brown, born in 1993, grew up surrounded by fame, dysfunction, and chaos. She watched her parents unravel in the public eye, and she bore the weight of their legacies. Tragically, in 2015, just 3 years after Whitney's death, Bobbi Kristina was found unconscious in a bathtub, eerily mirroring the way her mother died. She never regained consciousness and passed away at the age of 22. Whitney Houston's rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner at the 1991 Super Bowl remains a defining cultural moment. Her voice, unmatched, her patriotism, palpable, her control, breathtaking. In that moment, she wasn't just a singer, she was the voice of a nation. But even that glorious high couldn't protect her from the private pain that would consume her in the years to come. Bobby Brown, too, has spoken openly about his regrets and the consequences of fame, addiction, and choices made in youth. Despite his flaws, some argue he has unfairly borne the full brunt of blame for Whitney's downfall. The truth is far more complicated. What began as a love story between two extraordinary talents became a cautionary tale of how fame can destroy even the brightest stars. In the end, Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown were two people searching for love, peace, and healing, only to find themselves overwhelmed by the spotlight, the pressure, and their own demons. And while the world still sings Whitney's songs and dances to Bobby's hits, we must remember their story for what it truly was: a tragedy wrapped in glitter, pain hidden behind talent, and a child caught in the middle of it all. May they both find peace, and may Bobbi Kristina's memory remind us of the human cost behind the headlines.